Mr. Janis, distinguished members of Parliament, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is, of course, a privilege to be here today, and I thank Mr. Janis for giving us this opportunity to raise this important topic and to share our views about international development and geopolitics throughout the globe. And we've had very informative and insightful presentations today. Of course, my remarks, which I'll keep as brief and simple as possible within the 10 minutes that has been granted to me, is to discuss the situation within Afghanistan. Of course, as all of you know, in 2021, NATO hastily withdrew from the country. It caused the collapse of Republic in Afghanistan, Afghanistan's democratic government, which was heavily dependent, the government and the armed forces was heavily dependent on the presence of NATO, especially the United States, inside the country. And this created a power vacuum, which the Taliban terrorist organization, which only had around 40 to 45,000 forces in a country made up of 40 million, suddenly found the opportunity and it grasped it and came to power. And for the last 2.5 years, we've seen a country the size of France hijacked by the Taliban terrorist organization and 20 other regional and international terror groups. And this has put a pause on international development. It has created a multifaceted crises inside the country. Afghanistan is suffering from a political crisis, a crisis of political legitimacy, economic crisis, security crisis, and the most important one being the humanitarian crisis, which is the largest humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan's modern history. And for the past 2.5 years, the international community has very much adopted a policy of pouring hundreds of millions, and has exceeded even $1 billion of international aid through international organizations, multilateral organizations, and even directly. For example, the United States sends around $30 to $32 million of aid of US dollar cash on a weekly basis. But has this approach alleviated the humanitarian crisis? Has it improved the lives of Afghanistan citizens? It hasn't. Unfortunately, we're seeing human rights violations. The Taliban have deprived women from their basic rights, have completely erased them from public life, and have established a gender apartheid. We're seeing that a handful of clerics, extremist clerics and terrorists, are ruling over a large country made up of 40 million, have completely disregarded Afghanistan's religious diversity, ethnic diversity, and so forth, and have allowed an influx of foreign terrorist fighters and regional and international terrorist groups to use Afghanistan as a haven to challenge the rules-based international order, to align Afghanistan to authoritarian and totalitarian regimes around the globe, and potentially to threaten global security. And we're seeing the impact of this takeover by the Taliban terrorist organization in South Asia, with the increase of terrorist activities within Pakistan and Central Asia and the greater Middle East. And we are seeing signs of it even in the Western world. Why hasn't the international aid changed the situation within Afghanistan? Why is the humanitarian crisis, even though aid is still pouring into Afghanistan, is worsening, is exacerbating? And the reason is you have a hostile group, a terrorist organization inside Afghanistan, that is only looking after its own interests, disregarding the interests of Afghanistan's people. And they are creating the conditions for this humanitarian crisis to exacerbate and to challenge the stability of the region and, of course, global security as well. For example, the Taliban have been allowing, because of the humanitarian crisis, allowing an influx of refugees westwards toward the western border of Afghanistan with countries like Iran and then with others have been left open. We've seen an influx of 1.5 million citizens from Afghanistan take refuge in these countries. Of course, these refugees aren't going to stay in countries like Iran or Iraq or Turkey and so forth. The target is to migrate to the Western world, to the democratic world. This will allow the Taliban and their regional and international terror networks and other authoritarian regimes that are supporting them to gain a leverage against the democratic world. And of course, the international community lacks a realistic policy to prevent this from happening. This said, another consequence of this is the Taliban are allowing this wave of migration westwards in order to allow these foreign terrorist organizations, these foreign terrorist fighters that are flooding into Afghanistan, to disguise themselves as refugees, to infiltrate within Europe, to infiltrate within other countries in the region, and possibly North America in the future as well. And again, we're seeing international aid being poured into Afghanistan and allowing the conditions for these consequences to be achieved. What should be done? And of course, all of what I've been stating are verifiable information. The United Nations Security Council report that came out in June 2023 verified this, that the Taliban are granting passports and citizenship to foreign fighters, to terrorist fighters from different countries, in order to disguise themselves as refugees. That there is more than 21 regional and international terrorist groups supported by the Taliban. And how international aid is being exploited by the Taliban. CIGAR, for example, the US agency that oversees aid, came out with a report 6-7 months ago verifying how the Taliban are exploiting international aid that is benefiting, of course, terrorist groups. Just a week ago, the UN Security Council report came out with another report saying that in the last year, Al-Qaeda, being just one of the terror networks inside Afghanistan, has been able to expand its training camps, 8 new training camps throughout Afghanistan. And just imagine, as long as Afghanistan is being ignored, how much complex and complicated and dangerous the situation will become for global security. So what should be done? Of course, the National Resistance Front, being the largest democratic party and force within Afghanistan, with presence outside of Afghanistan as well, and other democratic forces. We've been proposing a solution that can basically address not only this domestic and regional problem, but this global challenge as well, which will harm global security in the future. And one way is to emulate what happened back in the 1990s when the Taliban were in control of parts of Afghanistan, was allowing the democratic forces of Afghanistan to carve a free zone within the country to allow the civil society to thrive, to preserve itself, to allow democratic forces to establish themselves as the legitimate government of Afghanistan, and to potentially create the conditions for at least international development, for a better healthcare system, for a better economy, and for infrastructure to improve, at least in parts of the country, that will allow the people of Afghanistan to gradually liberate their country from this nightmare. And of course, countries like Canada, which have had a firm stance when it comes to terrorism, especially the situation in Afghanistan and the reign of terror and tyranny that the Taliban have established to adopt a policy where the rest of the international community can emulate and allow the democratic forces of Afghanistan to return Afghanistan to the international community and to prevent the worst that can happen, much worse than September 11, 2001 and other terrorist groups. And we're seeing the resurgence of terrorism, unfortunately, throughout the globe. Thank you once more. I'm available for any questions that there might be. Thank you, Mr. Davis.